Hi, today I'm going to give you an introduction on Pentel Aquash Brush Calligraphy, which is this one in here. So let's talk about the differences between these three. This one, it's called Pentel Touch. You can also find it as Pentel Sign Brush or Pentel Fudge on the internet. This brush is probably a lot easier than definitely this option, and many other felt brushes out there. I find that this brush, you can use it and it performs in a really similar way as the pointed flexible nib for copperplate, and I use the same guidelines for copperplate that I use for this brush pen. Advantages of this brush. The advantages of this brush is that it's already pointy, so a lot of work is done for you. Also, it comes with an empty area in here, which I make sure that I always leave empty, because what I'm doing is I'm going to be using liquid watercolors, and I'm going to be using a couple of different colors if I wanted to. So I dip the brush inside as if it was a traditional painting brush, and then I can be going and changing colors as I go. So I actually don't need to use this area at all. Advantages of this. This is a natural hairbrush that it's used for ticket writing and lettering. The good thing about this brush is that you see is a lot longer. So basically, this brush has a very, very thin felt brush, and this one is a little bit bigger, and this one is a lot bigger. So the longer the brush, the bigger the letter forms. Because this is artificial synthetic hair, the ink is not going to be spreading so much along the paper. So it is going to give you some freedom, but with natural brushes, we use a different type of paint, and the brush can go and go and go and go forever. Also, the shape of this brush is round, and this means that we can then make it pointy by rolling the brush, or we can make it completely flat. And one brush is going to give you many, many, many different options of letters. So this definitely is like a really, really good brush. It's just a lot more challenging to control. And I find that maybe before jumping in here is useful to get a sense of how this works and how the letter form structure is working. So let's start with that. Now, okay, let's start with that, and I'm going to start with these basic movements as I have done in here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to dip the brush directly into my ink, and I'm gonna start. Regarding these guidelines that I have underneath, if you go to my Instagram account and follow the link on my bio, you will find a category called Calligraphy Guide Sheets, and in there you can select it, and you will be downloading a zip folder with a list of different grids depending on the style, and a list of resources and materials. Okay, so let's start with the basic movements. So the slant that I'm using in here is what my letters are going to be sitting. So this is the main slant of my writing. Now, a lot of the movements that I do are the same as what I do when I write copperplate calligraphy, and you can catch up on the introduction on copperplate also on my channel on YouTube. So I'm going to dip the brush, and now I'm going to go up. And same as copperplate, every time I'm going up, I have to make a very, very thin hairline mark from the baseline to the top of the X height. And this is a very good way of testing how thin you can actually create this up stroke. From the baseline to the top, as thin as possible. Now, I'm going down, and the down stroke, it's always going to be thick. So I'm gonna be marking some up stroke is always thin. Down stroke is always thick. So I'm going to position the brush with this angle, and then I'm going to start applying pressure. So you see the angle of the brush that is going that way, almost like perpendicular to the slant. I'm going to position the brush again in this angle, and I'm going to make sure that the hairs are in touch with the paper, and then pressure, and then release the pressure. So I have to have a sense of positioning the brush against the paper, pushing down stroke and releasing. Positioning the brush against the paper, push and releasing. And what you obtain is this sort of like flame shape. Position the brush, push down, release. And you see that there are different thickness depending on how much I press. And what is the right thickness? I'm going to say there is no right thickness. It's up to you. You are going to have to work out which of these thick strokes is the one that you want to be using. And once you set the one, then the challenge is repeating the same thickness across the other letter forms. So thick, down, thin. Again, push down, thick, and release. Now, we are going to exit the stroke. So I'm going to repeat the same again. Thin against the paper, push. Going back to thin and exit. I'm going to exit, and this is the area for my X high. And I'm going to make sure that the exit is going up to the middle of my X high. So I have this flame shape, and what is very important, I have a very, very round corner in here. And this will be the beginning of our alphabet. I'm gonna move it again. Okay. So let's repeat this movement, but this time a little bit longer. So this time I'm going up till the top of the ascender line. So I'm gonna repeat the same movement but longer. So I position the brush in this angle, and from here down and push. Follow the slant. As I'm reaching the baseline, release pressure and exit till the center of the X high. Again, place the brush on the side, and now push down. Keep going down. Start releasing as you are reaching the bottom of the X high and exit. Okay. This belongs to our letter I. This belongs to our letter T. Now, let's do this. With brush, things can go connected, as in every single letter holds hands to each other, or they cannot connect. So if we are connecting one letter to the other, you will have the entrance of the letter form, which is the thinnest stroke. Now I'm going to the top, apply pressure, going down, release pressure, and exit. And you will see that in the other sessions, I have talked about this reference point, where the thin and the thick meet, or the thin and the thick go away. And by looking at the reference point, we obtain a negative space, which is important to make everything we do, every letter we write, consistently. Okay, this is our letter I, and I'm going to place the dot either at the top of the ascender line or in the middle. And that will be our first letter form. Now, following the same movements, I'm going to do letter T. and I'm going to repeat that movement. So the up stroke is very thin, so the up stroke goes more or less till the center of the X high. Now, with my eyes, I need to envision how this movement is going to keep going up and up and up. So this is going to be the length of my letter T. Now, normally I do letter T not as tall as the ascenders, so maybe halfway. So in here, I will place the pen, push down, meeting the thin stroke in the middle of the X high, and round corner and going back to thin. And in here, I have either a very thin crossbar or a very fancy one. Now, if I don't use the up stroke, I can still do it in the same way. Place the brush in an angle, push down, keep going, start releasing before reaching the bottom of the X high and exit. And then in here, this time I can be feeling fancy and fancy pens T. Okay, these are the basic movements of the straight letter forms. And this sort of like flame will happen in a lot of these other letter forms, which is N's, M's, straight ascenders like the H. Now, you see in here, this is starting to get upright. So no, make sure that all your movements, all your letter forms are following the slant of the writing. Okay. Now let's go into ovals. So the oval is the foundation for the entire alphabet, for this type of alphabet. The oval is based on a movement that also goes thin, thick, thin, and I'm gonna make it clear in here, the slant. Okay, this is the slant, and now we are gonna start rounding, and we are going to be using like half of this oval, and then we will continue and half of this oval to go down, to go up and close it. Okay, so have the slant in here in front of you, and what I'm doing now is I'm not starting right at the top, I'm just starting a little bit below the top of the X high and thin, push and thin. That was too thin, thick at the beginning. Again, thin, push and release. Thin, push and release. Thin, push and release. Okay, let's do a few of these ones, and let's try to keep the same distance between them so that we are warming up with the hand at the same time that we are warming up with the eye. Thin, thick, thin, thick, thin, 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 thick, thin. Okay, now let's do the other way around. So let's start the other part of the oval. This oval in this direction, we call it a direct oval. And then we are going to do the other way around. So again, this is our slant. And in here, I'm doing the other way around. Thin, thick, and thin. Thin, thick, and thin. and try to maintain the distance as much as possible between them. That looks more or less the same. Okay, let's move the paper again. Now, let's try to go and do a direct oval, and we'll start with the first letter forms. So I'm going that way, from the top, rounding towards the left-hand side, down the stroke. Thin, thick, and thin, and narrow corner, and exit. Same as I explained before on the letter T. My exit is going to be as long as reaching half of the X high. Then from the top, we have two options. So I'm either going to be, I go inside the thick, going around, down, and a small loop. What I did in here looks like, first I went down, narrow corner, and exit, and the exit is reaching half of the X high. And the second, that was my first movement, starting up here. My second movement actually started inside the thick stroke and went up all the way thin, down, thin, and a small loop in here. And that's what I obtained. So that movement is the second one. Okay, so I'll do it again with the brush. Thin, again, thin, push, release, going around the corner, narrow corner, up till the center of the X high. I'm going back inside the thick and rounding, thin, a small loop. And that's what I obtained. That's more or less, okay, now it's softer, the curve. This, for me, it's a literal translation to a copper plate C with a pointed flexible nib. So let's do version 2 of this letter C. So version 2 starts exactly in the same way. So very, very thin, and start applying pressure, release, really narrow corner, and exit. I go back from the inside and I go back up. It gets very, very thin at the top, and then I apply pressure and finish. Option 1, option 2. It depends if what we are doing is a little bit more classical and defined, or it's a bit more loose and expressive. Okay? Now, let's do letter E, which is very similar to this movement. Letter E starts exactly with the same movements. So really thin at the top, push, go back to thin, and keep going up till the center of the X high. And then from here, I'm starting inside the thick, going up, super thin at the top, and then start to apply pressure and going back to thin and inside. So what I'm doing in here is basically building an oval inside my oval. So I have the entire oval, and then I'm building a second oval inside. So let's do it again. Starting super thin, apply pressure, going back to thin, exit. Go back inside the thick stroke, going around, apply pressure, going back inside, second oval. And you see what happens in here is this area is super thin on all of them, and then as you go down, it gets thicker. As you go down, it gets thicker, and going back to thin again. Okay, that's letter E. And then let's do the entire oval now for letter O. So again, the movements are the same. So starting super thin at the top and slowly applying pressure, going back to thin, going around, closing the oval inside. Let's do it again. And let's compare a few ones. Starting very thin, apply pressure, going back to thin, going around, back inside. Number 2. Number 3.